I'm Samantha Brentmore, and welcome to the Rosemoor Roundtable, a limited discussion series hosted by myself and Rose DiOro covering a range of topics specific to the romance audiobook industry. This sixth roundtable discussion is part 2 of a series on narrator perspectives in the audiobook industry. Specifically today, we will focus on our approach to vocal and performance technique. Today, we welcome 4 guests with different perspectives on the topic. The Rosemoor Roundtable is recorded over a live stream and produced and distributed by Brickshop Audio in podcast format. And now, here's your moderator for today, Rose.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Hello to our guests. We have this incredible panel here, and I'm just going to turn it over to all of you to tell us a little bit about yourselves, your name, how long you've been doing this work, anything else you'd like to share specifically about your vocal or acting training, since that's what we're really focusing on today. And Emma, why don't we start with you?
Okay. My name's Emma Wilder, or at least when I'm narrating romance, that's what it is. I just off the bat, I apologize because I'm a little under the weather today. And so I feel like it's a inauspicious day to talk about vocal technique, but also maybe it's the perfect time to talk about vocal technique. So I've been doing this since I think like 10 years. I would probably 2014. Before that, I worked as a stage actor for a while. I trained in a conservatory where I had a lot of speech and voice training. So I think I have a pretty solid foundation in speech and voice. And since then, I've kept working and learning in terms of, addressing issues with my voice and supporting it and taking care of it and everything like that. So yeah, I don't ever feel really confident in my voice, but I feel confident in my knowledge base about how to take care of my voice, even if I don't always do all those things. So yeah, I forgot, was there more to the question?
No, well, I'll ask you a quick follow-up question. Do you feel like, it sounds like you had a lot of technique from stage acting, both vocally and acting-wise. Do you feel like that was easy to translate into narration?
I don't know about easy to translate.
Or was there some additional training you had to do?
I think it was really helpful. I don't think there was additional training, but I think there was an adjustment period that I needed, right? Because you can get away with a lot more in some senses in this work because you don't have to project. You just have to, you can kind of perform a lot more intimately, which requires less of you physically. But if you have a little cold like this, you can probably sing and no one's going to notice. Everyone will notice for narration. And mouth clicks aren't a thing that you think about on stage. You think about am I spraying the front row? Oh well, they pay for those seats. That's what they get. So it's sort of a different group of things to think about. But I think that the heart of it is the same in terms of freeing your natural voice, taking care of yourself physically and supporting your breath and reducing tension as much as possible, so that your natural voice can come out, and that truth of it is, I think, equally relevant on mic or on stage. But like this, where I'm on mic or on stage, that obviously doesn't fly on stage. So it depends.
Okay. Thank you for the further clarification. I know we'll get way more into this in a minute, but it just seemed like a good moment to kind of ask that question.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass it over to you. I'm just looking at the order you are in my screen. Kit, why don't you introduce yourself?
Excellent. My name is Kit Swann. I, like Emma, have a stage background. I've been performing since I was about 8 years old. I was a co-founder of a Shakespeare company that is still going. I have 54 productions of 23 of Shakespeare's plays under my belt. So I have a linguistic background. I started doing audiobooks for the blind for the Library of Congress back in 2010. And then I took a long hiatus from that. And I actually got to do one of the Bridgerton books, just for the NLS. It wasn't.
It still counts.
It still counts. No, I know, but it's not commercially available. You can't go out and find it unless you are a part of that service. But then in 2019, Andy Arndt, who is my college roommate, said, you should really be doing this. You've got the background, you have the time. And I had a new baby, and at that point he was like 6, but at the time she started trying to get me to do it. She was like, hey, you're not on stage right now. You should be doing audiobooks. I was like, only famous people do audiobooks. And she was like, no, that's not true. So she sort of got me started, and I hit the ground running after my first APAC in 2019.
Thanks. Thank you.
Vocal health, vocal training. That's just all the things I just said.
Yeah, I think it all tracks and makes sense as training. And certainly a background in Shakespeare says a lot. That's a lot of linguistic and vocal technique that goes into performing Shakespeare any number of times, let alone the number you mentioned.
I know, it's a little crazy.
And we'll dive in, as I said, we'll dive into all of this in a lot more detail in a minute. But it's just, I think, helpful to start with a conversation like this to really get a sense of where you're coming from in order to dive in a little bit deeper. So Janina, let's hear from you.
I'm Janina Edwards, and my pseudonym for romance is Mari. Let's see, what do you need to know? I got the scratch in my throat yesterday, so we've transitioned from the husky, sexy voice to the now the, oh my God, what truck ran you over?
It sounds like a sexy truck, if you ask me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's what's going on with my voice today. I rarely get sick, so it's like, oh, this is interesting. Anyway, background. I did my first audiobooks in the age of the dinosaur in 1988, 89. I went to NYU as an acting major. In high school, I was in the theater, group. And I like to say, in high school, theater is like the land of misfit toys. If you don't fit anywhere else, you will find your people there. Yeah. And those were my people. And I'm from Chicago, and I went to NYU. And when I got to NYU, realized I don't know any of these people. I'm on some other island. These are, I'm not sure they're the misfit toys. I was very overwhelmed, and didn't act in anything. And I studied at the Strasberg Institute and Playwrights Horizons. They have several programs there, I believe, still. And I was in the studio program, which you could choose a studio in the city to train at. Anyway, so I had that training. I didn't act in anything. I was very intimidated by all of these actors who seemed to know what to do and had their glossies and everything. Long story short, I graduated and stayed in New York and started exploring what my realm of this work would be, and took a voiceover class. And someone mentioned, I think the teacher mentioned talking books, which is what they were called at the time. So I did about, I want to say 6 or 8 children's books for the American Foundation for the Blind. And immediately, of course, left New York, moved back to Chicago for various reasons. But that was the beginning. And, training wise, I have the acting training, but in the interim between leaving New York and about, I think I left in 1989, and sort of relaunched this career in about 2010. And as you can imagine, there was huge differences and changes in growth it became an industry. The technology, became something you could have a booth in your home. That was not something that was common before then. And in the interim, there was no training at that time for specifically voiceover or audiobooks. So I basically read to my daughter at night, and she will tell you all of the books had multiple voices. All of her stuffed animals had voices, not because I was trying to train, but that was what I did. And I had a dream of getting back to this work at some point, and so I volunteered on campuses in Chicago, and read textbooks for the blind, and read at the Lighthouse and different places that help people who are blind and visually impaired. And in 2010, went to my first APAC. 2010, I think that's right. Because I was taking that dream and putting it into action, and worked with a producer here in Atlanta, Georgia, and made a demo and burnt CDs and took it to APAC and was like, throwing them at which is apparently what you're not supposed to do, but it kind of worked out. So, I don't care what the pundits say. But as far as vocal health, aside from my example today, I keep it pretty simple, but I have that training. I'm also a yoga teacher, which actually is supportive of this in terms of breath and, different things. There's breath control is a whole arm of yoga, and I'm also a singer primarily within yoga. There's a style called kirtan, which is devotional chanting, which I do. So that kind of works into breath control and different aspects of this as well.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all that. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Aaron Shedlock. I have been recording audiobooks for around 8.5 years now. Yeah, 8.5 years. Before that, I don't have a formal acting background. I was behind the microphone. I was in front of the mixing board. I engineered sessions since the early 2000s, but I really got into it in like 2006 is when I really started working for an actual studio and not just kind of temping and going in and doing late night sessions. But I got into it for music and then realized music was not my jam. I really didn't like working with troublesome artists and
how dare you, sir?
A lot of big personalities in that business, but so I got more into the post-production side, and I finally got introduced to voiceover actors and people doing animation stuff, people doing commercials, people doing narration, like TV narration, that kind of stuff. And I met this guy named Hal Holbrook, who I recognized from some movies that my grandfather was really into in the 70s.
Oh my
80s,
gosh.
Yeah. And he was recording the narration for a documentary, and we were going through it, and I really hit it off with him. He was a super nice guy. And he was like, Aaron, get in this booth. Come in here. You've got a great voice. I want you to read from here to here. I want you to read this copy. I'm going to give you a little bit of this and that. You go ahead and you read this copy. And I did. I went in there. I was so nervous and just like, but we were just playing around, having fun. He was like a really cool mentor kind of vibe, like from him. That was what I was getting from him. And I read this stuff and he was like, see, you could do this totally. And that kind of started the whole, that was the seed that got planted. And it took quite a while for me to get the nerve up, and I engineered so many sessions. I learned from so many different types of people, how they approach the work. And then I got into doing infomercial stuff, and I started doing infomercial voiceover work. And I did that for a long time. I worked for Billy Mays, worked for Anthony Sullivan.
Wow.
And I was watching that industry not necessarily crumble, but I was watching the internet and I was seeing what was happening with advertising and agencies. Those were where I was making all my entire income was based off of advertising in some form or another. And I was watching the internet change that industry so much that I needed, and I also wasn't happy. I had a long commute to work. I was stressed out all the time. I was working on these more crazy people. The infomercial industry has a lot of psychos.
Shocker.
I mean, they were fun people, just huge personalities. And sometimes it was just overwhelming when I just wanted to go home and, just be with my family, having to work weekends and that kind of stuff. But in 2015, I started my nights and weekends. I started recording audiobooks. I reached out to an audiobook narrator, this guy, McLeod Andrews, and he just said, I already knew the technical side of it. I already had a studio. I had microphones. I had my computer rig. I had my Pro Tools system. And I just went in there and I recorded, I auditioned for a short story on ACX, and I got that one. And then I started auditioning for romance because somebody suggested there were a lot of romance titles available. And I booked one like immediately, like a month after I started doing this. And then I was like, oh shit. Oh no. Okay. So I actually booked one. Now I have to actually do this. And I realized how much of a marathon audiobook narration is. And when you're doing voiceover work, you have to take care of your voice, but it's also very short stints. It's hard work, but it's only for like a half hour or a 2-hour session, and you're done, and you get the rest of your day to kind of chill and relax. Narration is a lot different. It's a long game. You have to hydrate. You have to wake up in the morning. You got to drink all your water, and you got to take care of your voice with your ginger teas and your throat coats and
atomizers,
nebulizers,
massage.
Anything to like calm and cool this area that is really. I don't think it was actually meant to do this much work.
Imagine that. You're not supposed to speak for 6 to 8 hours straight.
Every day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. And so vocal health became very important to me. And it was just, I drink a lot of water. I take all my vitamins. I try and eat really healthy. I do the best I can. there's a lot of fun stuff out there that I enjoy eating that is not great for the voice, like dairy products and coffees and pumpkin spice lattes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But luckily, I have a deep enough and a gravelly enough voice naturally that I can push. I can push really hard and still pull it off. And luckily, I don't get sick very often. Not up in this area.
Lucky you.
So yeah, that's me. That's my story.
Thank you. And I'll just throw in a little bit of my background too, and why this topic is so exciting for me, because I'm a super big voice nerd. I have a primarily musical theater background, but I was a classically trained singer, and I've been an actor since I was a little kid. Like, that's what I did with all of my free time, which is all the time when you're a kid, is theater stuff. And always wanted to do voiceover work as well. Even as a little kid, I was like really obsessed with the idea that I would be a Disney princess, especially because they sang. And then I learned that the singers at the time were different than the voices doing the speaking. And so I wasn't sure what to do with that. I was like, I'll be the first one to do both. None of that happened.
Dream big.
Yeah. Little did I know that those go to like real big celebrities. But anyway, that's where that bug started for me. And I also, as a theater actor in New York, needed more money and voiceover. I started in other kinds of like industrial voiceover and stuff. Paid a lot better than stage work. And so I could support my theater work with that and also really utilize these vocal skills that I had spent my entire life honing. But I'd never done at the time when I started voiceover specifically. I had really not had any on-camera experience. And I've learned that the way that you, and Emma, you kind of got into this a little bit, like the scaling down for the microphone is much more akin to being on camera than it is on stage, right? And so as a musical theater performer, especially, I really had to learn how to do that. But while still maintaining kind of the vocal, like healthful approach that I had while singing and also speaking on stage and all of that. And the other part of my sort of vocal journey that got me into narration was stamina, like you were saying, Aaron. That all long form stuff, even stage work, singing, it's a completely different beast than speaking for hours and hours and hours on end. As a musical theater performer, you have to care for your body in really specific ways because your whole body is your instrument. And it's the same for voiceover, but perhaps even more intense. Just as you said, Emma, like when you got this microphone, the tiny little things are going to be noticed in a way that they wouldn't when you're on stage. So as I started to move into narration and knew that was something I wanted to do, I specifically sought out training. I sought out opportunities to work on stamina and then training specifically for narration, both in acting and vocal technique and how to kind of transfer some of my existing skills to apply to this different art form. But yeah, I'm a super big voice nerd and think about, like I love learning all of the intricacies of how your voice works and how you make sound and how you can manipulate it to sound a particular way, which is something we do a lot of in our work. And we're going to get real deep into that. And so, yeah, why don't we just jump in? I guess I was going to have us start out with acting, but I think we're kind of in this voice technique space. So maybe we'll start there and just go a little deeper with some of the things that we've already been discussing. Aaron, you've all mentioned it a little bit, but are there other things that you want to share about just the amount of work it goes into caring for your body and your voice on a regular basis in order to have that stamina in the booth to, especially I think in romance, and this is particularly for the women, when you're doing these growly voices, there's so many growly voices that aren't necessarily natural to the way that our voice boxes work. What are some ways that you prepare your body for that and for the longevity of using your voice in that way?
I have a monologue that I generally I read through when I start. That's just to kind of it does several different things for me. First, it gets me a little bit warmed up. It's amazing how quickly your body forgets how to speak. And you have to kind of like jumpstart and you're like, like when I first get in the booth and I sit down and I'm like, all right, here we go. Come on. Woo, okay. I haven't spoken yet today. You don't even realize how you don't even speak until I actually get down, sit in the booth. I mean, sometimes I do. It depends on what time I get up in the morning and what the house is doing. But sometimes I get in the booth and I haven't even said one word. So I have to like start from like, oh, I gotta remember how to speak. I gotta get this all prepped up and ready to go. The water helps tremendously get you nice and hydrated. But then I go through and I have a monologue, and the monologue connects the brain to the voice. And the monologue, it's from a movie called V for Vendetta. And the reason why I picked it was because it was very Shakespearean in one thing. The way that it was written, and it wasn't completely rhyming, but it does have a lot of rhyming, but it used a ton of V words. So it forces my brain to really hone in on the text. And it also tricks my brain into, okay, now you have to perform this text. Okay, now you have to perform this text, not in front of people, but in front of the microphone. So you got to dial it back and you have to get it more intimate. You have to calm down and get the tension out of your shoulders. You have to relax from the head all the way down. And then once I get into that space and I kind of remember what it's like to narrate, I mean, it's gotten much easier over the years. When I was first starting out, I didn't even realize I was doing this stuff, but I was doing it while I was recording. So I hadn't learned to do this prior and then start recording at a much, at a much higher level. But then once I get going, I go and I go through my whole day. That's usually how my days start out, is just doing that little monologue and getting everything activated, getting the brain tuned in. 'Cause it's a lot of brain work too. You're not just performing and speaking. You're producing, you're directing, you are performing, and then you're going back
engineering a lot of the time. Yeah.
Wearing all the hats.
You're wearing all the hats, and sometimes that gets very overwhelming. And the microphone is so sensitive, and you are the instrument. You're also the director, and it's going to pick up anything that's going on through your mind. The microphone's going to pick up. I was working with a coach at one point, and I was going, and she stopped me and she said, "Okay, you drifted off there. Back at this sentence, I could hear you kind of drift off. You were getting kind of bored with whatever paragraph was going on. So go back and find find the purpose of this paragraph, find the scene, figure out the character's motivation, and kind of start over." So, there's a lot going on in your head while you're just reading a book. There's a reason why you're so sweaty. It's not because the booth is so hot. It is pretty warm in there, but you're also working your butt off too. Yeah. Your brain is going 100 miles an hour. It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I forget to warm up, it's always, I do have a lower voice like Janina Mari does as well. So I usually do my growly guys early in the morning. I used to record overnight, so it was a lot easier. I would get up at 3 and record from 5 until my son would wake up. But yeah, if I don't warm up ahead of time, I've got a series of warm-ups that have evolved over the course of my life. I've pick and choose from things that work for me, usually with a lot of humming to start off with, like imagining that you have an egg in your mouth and then that kind of humming, because it actually drops the focus of your humming to your actual vocal cords. If you're humming with just a flat mouth, it sort of it closes off the back of your throat. But if you've got that egg in your mouth, it really, it really focuses on the voice box. So when I don't do that,
tension out of your tongue, right?
Yes, and the other one too is a tongue stretch, because your tongue is so long, and we have to talk a lot. But stretching your tongue that way, you can feel it all the way down your throat.
Yeah.
So those are the two main things, and tongue twisters with fricatives and plosives to get that all warmed up. That helps too.
I can always tell when I haven't done enough, or sometimes I do nothing, but I haven't done enough to prepare my tongue for recording, because I start tripping over words incessantly. I'm like, oh my God, I just need to do some tongue twisters. And it's incredible. It's just like going to the gym and working. You are working out a muscle, but you forget that, right? It's a really powerful muscle and has a big impact on the work that we're doing, for sure.
Yes, definitely.
One of the strongest in our body, I think.
Yeah. And then we do it's easy to carry tension there or have it kind of seize up without noticing it. And that'll happen. And I'm just like, anytime I feel stuck, it's often just that. It's like something's going on with my tongue.
Yep. And there's certain words that trigger that too. Words like nodded, anything with a lot of taps, like tongue taps. I notice after a while, like I can tell when my tongue's starting to get tired or if I haven't warmed up properly. I do weird warm-ups. I do like lip warm-ups where you go.
Yeah, I do those too. Trills.
All your muscles going. And then the tongue warm-up is the.
Yeah.
And that wakes up the tongue a little bit more for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I want to say that though, I want to say that I don't do that. That's not true. I do, but it's I don't spend like a half hour. There's probably, I consider my shower in the morning part of my.
Absolutely.
Totally.
But, and I might do, and I might, go up and down the scale a little bit. I have a couple of tongue twisters that focus on ending D's and T's. Shoulders and shoulders and soldiers was just one of those phrases that makes me crazy. But I don't do a lot of like, we will now warm up.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I just wanted to respond to this just in your question. Over the years, as I conceive of characters or prepare in that way, and that, again, that sometimes is more than I'm really thinking about them, which I think is mainly just time and experience versus I'm so good at it. I don't do a lot of voices that are, I try to make sure that voice, the character voice, is within my range. I'm not doing a voice that's taking me someplace that's, if I have to do that much preparation to do that voice or pretend, and meaning that it's not in my range, I need to rethink that because I've got to be able to maintain that for the book, not hurt my voice. I got to be able to work, this is a long game, as Aaron was like, I can't be doing some voice that tomorrow I can't talk because
particularly not if in the next book in the series, that's the hero. And you're like, oh no.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, no.
I have learned that the hard way, meaning that I remember one of my first books that I enjoyed the book, but it was a female voice, but it's the author said, her voice was really squeaky and high. And I went, and I was like, that was not sustainable. I did it. And it was one of those things that was like, in chapter 2, oh shit, I did that. I did that for the rest of this book. And I would not set that up now. There's sometimes, I can go up a little bit. The author has told you they're up there, but that doesn't mean I have to literally go up there or down that. And I was going to say too, because Kit and I hung out together with Andy in Chicago a couple of years ago. I've learned, she manages to embody these male voices. And she is not dropping her voice down into this, deep pocket. So other ways to pitch is only one. How you bring out a voice. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out. It's not always about taking your voice, especially in terms of pitch, into these realms that are not your voice.
Anyway. Thank you for saying that. That's all so important. And I'm not sure, I don't know. We'd have to see in the comments, but I would be curious to know how many listeners know about that nuance, that thing, those choices that all of us narrators are making all the time about about sustainability within a particular book, especially in romance, where you're often working in a series and you never know what character is going to become a main character in the next book you do. And so you do have to be really careful about choices. And I do think I want to get more into this in a minute, but especially about accents too. But
can I make one more comment about that? Because I've done a lot of books by this woman, D.A. Young, and great books, lovely characters, but she has a tendency to do this, and his voice was deep. And like she likes to create worlds. So you'll be in a town and this one falls in love and then this one falls in love.
There's 6 brothers and they all sound like
she's
this.
Like,
right.
But each time she says, and his voice was deep. And so again, the problem I got into is the first book I did for her. I was like, oh, okay. And she actually was very involved in listening to character voices before which I try not to let authors dictate these things anymore. But she was like, oh, he needs to be deeper. So I was like, okay. It's like, I don't have my voice is but so deep. And then the next character, oh, he's very deep. And I'm like, Okay, I'm gonna find something else to do here because I ain't got nothing here. I mean, they can be at the same deep, but give them some different personality within there. But they can't be deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm not James.
Yes.
I think
100%.
One thing that I do for that particular problem, like I have a voice that like goes super deep without having to force it. It's just like can live really low. And so all of my warm-ups are like loosening and freeing so that I can actually speak up here and be clear and not just like live. Because even in real life, like when I'm not performing, I kind of like let my voice fall a little lower and flatter. And like, that's not good. Like I should be supporting better all the time. Because like, this is really where I'm most comfortable, but it's not always where I speak. But for me, sometimes if it's like a series where like there's 6 burly brothers and like each one is grumpier than the last, sometimes I'll just be like, okay, like between books for this series, I'm just going to kind of do a reset and like not worry so much about like, unless they're all in tons of group scenes, like if it's really just the hero and heroine mostly, like I won't worry so much about consistency with the last book. I'll just kind of like do it again because there's only so many low, grumpy voices in your wheelhouse, and you can't. Sometimes I think working too hard to differentiate is just like not necessary to the listener experience, perhaps, or at least that's what I tell myself when I'm like, I don't have any more. Like,
well, we've already gotten a comment in the comments saying that for at least one listener, they don't remember from book to book what the person's voice sounded like. So we can give ourselves a little more freedom.
Good. Unless you're binging.
Specific. Yeah.
Try to go with personality. But in terms of warm up, I was going to say, like when I started doing this, I did a really long warm up, and I think it was really kind of a security blanket for me, where I was like, I'm going to be so prepared. Like I'm going to do my whole, like moving through all my resonators, like, like everything. And it just was not necessary.
Not practical, probably.
Yeah. It was like, I don't have time. And also like, it doesn't make a difference. So why am I doing that? And so now if I'm feeling healthy, I really just do like, and like, and then like good to go. But if I'm not feeling healthy, I do have like today, I really wanted to narrate. I didn't end up narrating because I feel like crappy, but I was like, okay, I'm going to take a shower. In the shower, I'm going to stretch my masseter muscles and my pterygoidae, even though it hurts like a bitch. And then I was like, okay, then I'm going to use the neti pot. I'm going to like use my fancy, like I'm a sucker for, I like have the same winter coat that I had 10 years ago, but like, I cannot say no to a fancy gadget that promises me the moon with my voice. So then I use my navage. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to do like a hot steam inhale and maybe a cool steam later. And then I have like this little metal like straw and like all this stuff. And then sort of I should do yoga, Janina, but I haven't been. My body's like so beat up from having a kid that I really need to be. No should. It would be helpful to me to be looser. And I like do a lot of neck stretches because like tension is what collapses my range and my sound. Like I have a much fuller sound if I can just sort of loosen and free things. And my jaw gets really tense. So like if I'm like you were talking about like your tongue, you can tell it's not ready. Like sometimes I'll feel like my jaw is like climbing off my face to the right and like suddenly lisping, and I need to like stop. Do you know what I mean? I just need to like let my jaw hang off my skull. So like these are all things that I think about and will go to when I need them. But just like with preparing characters in the beginning, I like highlighted everything, made extensive notes, and now I'm like, I think I know what that is most of the time. I've sort of pared down my routine to what's actually helpful as opposed to what makes me feel prepared and therefore confident.
Totally. I think those are all really excellent points. And it actually leads into another question I had, which is, do you actively think about your vocal technique while you're recording? And it sounds like in some cases, yes, right? Like if you are noticing that something's not working right, it sounds like most of us would stop and do certain exercises in order to like work out that muscle or whatever it is, ease the tension. When you're doing a voice, let's say it's probably a side character that hopefully isn't coming back and you've made some really specific choice about them because it does happen. Are there things that you're thinking about vocally actively while you're performing that character? Or would it be more of like a stop and make an adjustment and then get into it? Does that question make sense? Hopefully that makes sense.
Physically, I find myself like adopting a posture for characters a lot of the time. And that'll be like, not even consciously. I just find myself like, this guy talks over here and like this friend talks up here to the left. And like, there's no reason. But like, it helps my body remember what those things are, I think.
Yeah.
But other than that, no. And I do find like, if it's pretty out there, if I'm like, this grandpa's like really like, I'll be like, what a weird choice. Is that what I did before? And like, inevitably it is like, just like, I can kind of trust that, I don't know. I just, we've all read a lot of books in our lives. We have a lot of knowledge of the world and how people are. And sometimes things just feel natural. And that's like, it just comes out of you without too much planning. Although sometimes you do have to obviously plan.
Yeah.
I did have one character that I got like halfway through the book and he appeared again. And by that point, I knew more about him and I had made him too harsh at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I went back and re-recorded just his lines in the way that I knew him at the end. So it was like that kind of thing where, and then because I had a posture for him, it was like I dropped back into it and then like I could do his voice, even though it had been a few days since I had said anything in his voice.
Yeah. And that sort of shifting your body, I don't know for you all, but for me, that's where so much of the tension comes from too in the booth, because we're having to do so much to create with only our voices an illustration of who these people are. And so sometimes just like a little slouching or sitting up straighter or something like that is going to help you find that character and also sort of realign what's happening in your body to create a different kind of or a more specific sound. And for me, I will find that by the end of like a day of recording, my body is wrecked because I have intentionally or maybe subconsciously moved tension to certain parts of my body in order to channel like this or that character or this or that voice. And it's super physically exhausting.
Particularly for first person, I think, for tense first person books, you find yourself like this the whole time, as opposed to for like something more detached.
So
I definitely embody, I think overall, I tend to be more organic in how I'm developing the voice. But if there's something, some years ago, there was a book and a character had a lisp. And for something like that, I might become more technical and look and in the script literally, knock off the whatever, the S's or whatever word, because those like accents, those sounds come out on more they're specific. It's when somebody has a French accent, it's not just this frosting you put on everything. It's something that comes out in particular. The accent comes out in the sounds that are in the language they're speaking that is not their native language,
right?
Which authors don't always get. In other words, we have a deep blah 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 accent, and it's like, but you haven't given me words where that would actually
He'll be like, "Hi, you could hear the Russian steps in his tone," and you're like, "Oh no!"
A single word, a single like nondescript word is supposed to carry so much information.
But in a situation, I might literally, assuming it's not the main character, go through and note on the text. Drop this sound or whatever, I'll just put a cross mark. So I might do something more technical, but most of the time it's more organic in the body like that. That all said, going back to one of the points Aaron made, I also leave the booth. I will, it's like, we've done enough, take a 10-minute quick walk around the block or do one sun salutation and get out of, just to move, let the neck free up, go sit on the deck and let the sun hit me for a few minutes. And then we'll go back in the booth, something like that. So those breaks, I think, are also, we get in a flow. I get in a flow, and it's like, oh yeah, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I don't want to stop.
The booth, especially in the winter when you don't have that much daylight. Leave the booth.
Yeah,
right. I had a deviated septum, and I had it repaired last year. And now, when I do M's and N's, I have to really consciously talk about technique. I have to consciously not close it off because what's remaining of my septum vibrates at such a high frequency that I get a buzz sound, and I thought it was my mic. And I contracted George the tech, and he's like, no, that's a biological sound. He's like, this is not. So I have to like consciously drop my jaw so that the air goes down instead of up and vibrates that.
For a while I was getting clicking, and I was like, what is clicking? And it turns out it was my eustachian tubes. And I went to an ENT. They were like, yeah, like that just happens. Like, we don't know what to do. And I was like, well, that's not good enough. So
I did the same problem.
That, like, do it, but like working your pterygoidae and your masseters and like doing like ear stretches and then doing like sort of woo-woo, but like who cares if it works, like stretches to like loosen the seams of your skull kind of stuff. It fixed it.
So that's amazing.
There's hope. Yeah.
Was it something that was showing up on recordings, or just you were hearing it in your head?
No one was complaining about it, but like, yeah, it was in the record. You know, like there's a level of sounds where like nobody really kicks it back to you, but you're like, that's not good.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. If it bothers you, then it'll get in your head. Literally.
I had the same problem last summer. And the funny thing is once you hear it in yourself, you hear it in other people's narrations. I still listen to audiobooks when I drive, and I hear it and some people are like, oh, there's that click. So this does happen to other people. It's not just me and my weird face.
Let it soothe you, because sometimes listening to other audiobooks will make you be like, oh, like I can let that go. That is how people sound, and like it's okay. Yeah.
That's why I could never like be my own post engineer, because it's just like you get too into the minutia. Like you hear every single for me anyway. It's just I get way too into the details that no one else is going to care about.
Right. It's like I used to work for a master gardener, and they were like, "Stop! The weeding will never be done." And so like you have to figure out a point where it's like, that's good enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
Done is better than perfect. Let's go on.
Yeah. And that actually is a good segue into talking a little more about acting approaches, because I think what's complicated about, I started to say this with accents before too, what's really complicated about the work that we do is we are essentially illustrating what's on the page. It's not necessarily going to be like if you were playing one character in a play and you went really deep into portraying that character, and their voice would sound a really specific way and you would move in this really specific way. It's a hint of those things in narration, right? So when you are, I would love to talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you find that sort of middle ground of hinting, but hinting enough so that you keep the listener, that you give the listener enough information that they can really understand who this person is without trying to be a perfectionist about it, without going way too deep into it. Because if you do that for every character, it's just, one, not sustainable, and two, it tends to be too big for the mic, right?
Yes. Yeah. Then you're like, I'm putting on a multicast show, and people are like, I can't. This is too much.
Yeah. Yes, I'd love to hear from anyone, sort of how you manage that, or how did you start out too big and then find your way to being a little smaller? Were you always able to kind of navigate that fine line of nuance?
Some of that is the author. A lot of that is the author. So if you get a book where the characters are written broadly, you have permission to go a little more broadly with those characters. If it's something more subtle, you don't do that. I would say that's your first guideline is the text, because we're not writing the story. You used a good word and I can't remember, illuminating it, whatever, lifting it up.
I was saying illustrating.
But we're not writing it. So I'm working with what the writer has given me. We won't get into the writers who don't give me anything, but that's where you start. So you have permission based on what they are sharing. And as far as how far to go, I think that's I don't know, that's kind of time and experience and playing around with it, and what you can sustain. I don't know. Someone else may have a different comment on that. I don't know. I don't decide. I mean, I have said, this character, I'm playing it really broad. I was like, let's just pull that back in a little bit. But playing, I was talking to somebody the other day and saying that typically the first day I record a book takes longer, because whatever I might think those characters are going to sound like, once I get in the booth and I'm hearing it on the headphones, assuming there's no accent that I had to perfect beforehand, I'm what I thought it was going to be, and then what I start to get as I do it may be different. And I'm like, oh, that's what that actually is going to sound like. And so I may end up doing what Kit was just saying, is like, I may not, maybe I click into that voice further down in the book and go, that's the voice. Let me go back. I haven't submitted those files yet. Let me fix that couple of lines. So the first day typically takes me a little bit longer. And then as I get to know those people in my voice, then we're flowing. And like, okay, the second day and beyond is like usually like, okay, we're here. I got it. And I've got my clips if I have to go back and say, what did I do? What did I do for them? Yeah. But I'm curious what other people think.
I think some of it is taste, right? Like there are sizes of how big a performance is that are just preference, and like people do different things, and there's somebody who likes that the best. Like Katie Kalgren, the late great Katie Kalgren, she was like huge with her choices, like really big, like a lot, like, but it was perfect, and for someone like Scott Brick, like it's in a different, he plays on a different range, like it's much simpler, but both of those are genius. So it's really what you as a narrator, like you can do the other thing probably, but there's probably a place where you're most comfortable. And then it's also matching it to the book. Right. I mean, you can't like throw yourself out the window, like you bring what you bring. But you do, like Janina was saying, you also have to honor the book. And I find like the really wonderful books, really well-written books need less from me. There's books where I'm like, I think this is what the author meant. So I'm going to like give her what I think she, like, I'm going to goose this with a performance so that it's really clear what's happening. And there've been times when then I'm doing a different book that's written in a different way. And I find myself doing that. And then if I listen back to it, I'm like, oh my God, like I am getting in the way of this beautiful book. So I think that's something that you just have to develop a feel for, the more, not just books you narrate, but books you read as a person in the world reading books. Like, and I find in the beginning, I felt like I was too big. Now, sometimes because I narrate so much contemporary romance, sometimes I get into that zone. And then when I'm doing something else, I need to like shake it off.
Reset.
Yeah. Like I need to not let myself get in ruts. And I don't mean a bad rut, just like some things are required for a certain book to a lesser degree for a certain genre. And like, don't get stuck.
It feels like you are your own repertory theater company. Yeah. And so like the characters will always be you. The main characters will always be you, because some version of you, because that's the easiest thing to drop back into for corrections, first of all.
And it's the only true thing. Like you want to give them truth, like give them accurate truth.
And you just do it with intention than putting on, I guess. So it's like the main woman will always be yourself. If you're a woman, man, the main character will always be yourself. And then that opposite will always be the partner role that you can comfortably sustain for the longest period of time. And then after that, you'll probably like a guy that comes in for one line, make him a tenor because there are too few tenors in this book. Like any guy that comes in, I'm like, he's a tenor, because the other 7 guys in this book are, as Emma said, the growly brothers who get progressively grumpier. But yeah, like I tend to gravitate to making different women distinguishable in a scene. I'll gravitate to Sex in the City. So like the main character would always be the Sarah Jessica Parker, and then like one of her best friends is always the Charlotte. Like she goes up higher, and then you got a Samantha that's in there, and she's and then Cynthia Nixon, who's very direct. And then if there are more women, I go to like Friends, and there's like a Phoebe and a Rachel. There's a Joey, and that kind of thing. Where archetypes that I can easily reach into and make into a character that people will understand just with intention, the simplest way.
So great point. I think a lot about this archetypal voices And in fact, this whole panel was somewhat inspired by Lake Bell's book, Inside Voice. I don't know if any of you have read it or listened. It's actually only in audio. It's fantastic, especially if you are interested in the things that we're talking about today. It's definitely worth a listen. And she has this whole section essentially about archetypal voices. And I think about it so much because what you're talking about, Kit, are characters that are well known, right? And they are based off of like specific types. And what is it about those voices that makes us associate certain traits to them? And I don't know if you all think about that at all. But when I guess the question for all of you is, how do you land on what archetypes to use? Are they archetypes? Like I think most of us tend to have, like you're describing, Kit, like specific go-to voices for certain character types. And what has led you to those voices? Aaron, do you have? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I've got a casting process in my head. And it's basically just all these different sliders. Like I've got, they go from serious to playful. Where is this character in this range? Is he on the more playful side? Is he on the more serious side? Mm-hmm. Or is he like all the way at the bottom? Is he just a brooding character? Other archetypes that I slide around with would be, is he his pacing? Is he a fast talker? Is he a slow talker? Is she more introspective? Does she talk more like this, or does she talk more like this? I've got all these little sliders in my head, and when I'm reading, the little words or little descriptors inside the text that I'm reading will trigger each one of those and kind of develop the character. And kind of I'm doing this all on the fly usually, or if I have my prep notes, I'm doing it on the fly with my prep notes. So I'm sitting there, like taking my notes for each character, so I get an idea of who each person is, and I have my little notes up on the side when I'm reading. But yeah, I've got a little process of casting that goes on in my head. I have my favorite movies and TV shows. Like right now, I just finished binging Big Bang Theory. So I've got I've got like 6 brand new characters I get to cast for books. I just haven't had the perfect project to cast, some of the characters from that show, which I'm dying to. I just need something funny enough. I need a rom-com to dive into now to take, this character is definitely a Sheldon. This character is definitely a Howard. This character is definitely a Rendeep. It's just all kinds of stuff.
I feel like I've been talking too much, so I'll shut up for a little bit after this. But I just wanted to say, I think I don't do that so much as casting like from real people, although I will cast from narrators that I know, just whether they did other books in the series or just because that's a voice I know. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, this woman, I think that's she has the authority of January Lavoie or whatever. This one, I think it's a younger, fresher, brighter, or this hero seems like a Teddy Hamilton to me as opposed to a Sebastian York or whatever. But I will say in terms of the because I of course have the innocent best friend and then the party friend and whatever that if they have one line, that's all they get. But hopefully if they're a more fleshed out character, you don't even consciously really think about this necessarily, but you think about we all do all of those things in real life, I don't always talk exactly like this. Sometimes I'm talking like this and sometimes I want to make an impression and I'm talking like this, making a joke. So how you play into those archetypes is a conscious choice about how you're presenting yourself to the people around you and how you want to be perceived. And then sometimes interesting characters present themselves in a way that is not actually really what they're all about, so you can make sort of more layered choices like that. But I do think it's not so external. I'm not saying this well, but I don't think it's this external stable of characters. I think it's a palette that goes into how we all talk all the time, depending on who we're talking to and what situation we're in and how we want to be seen. So it doesn't feel like a false thing. It's more true.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also, I haven't listened to the whole book, but I think Samantha told me about the book.
We had a book club about.
So and I do think about the work that we do in that way. Just I think you use the word archetype and I have something I'm positing in my head. We are constantly playing with archetype versus stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying not to, unless it's what the author has done, we're trying not to find a character, but we're always, it goes back to your question. It's like, we want to touch on those things that let you know that that's a German woman in 19 whatever, but not fall completely into the stereotype of that.
Right.
It's always a dance. It's never, oh, you just do this and you'll be perfectly fine. You're always, we're always playing with that. And why does that sound or that accent say that to our audience? That's way deeper than we have time to talk about.
Right. It's a whole other conversation for sure.
I believe that's what we're doing. And I also, I believe that everybody code switches. And I think I'm kind of getting into that. We talk one way. We all do. We're trying to look smart and we're talking on the, Zoom or whatever this one is.
I'm on a fancy.
And then if I'm talking to my daughter, there's a shorthand in the family and I say what we all do that.
Yeah.
So I'm agreeing with you, but no one, that's, when we talk about, I hate the word authentic because it doesn't mean shit. But anyway, and again, forgive me for cursing. People don't just have one voice. So, yes, our shorthand for books, we're typically, this is what this person sounds like.
Yeah.
But if they're talking to the potential boyfriend, then it's one thing. And then talk to your girlfriend afterwards. I can't believe he did blah, blah. And we don't all stay, nobody, even James Earl Jones doesn't stay all the way down. I'm sure his voice raises a little bit,
Yeah.
So it's I think if you want to look at it, what we do is really, really interesting work.
Yeah. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about, Janina, about how you look for those particular clues in the text? You personally, like, what is your process for, because you're exactly right. Like, no single person talks the same all the time. And that goes for our characters we're playing too. And so how do you identify those moments where you've created this voice for someone, but now they're talking to their mother instead of their boyfriend? And so what are the clues that you look for about what those differences are in conversation with this person versus this person?
So again, hopefully the writer's given me some clues. They've actually written it. I was talking to some folks last night, like, the scene was written and, it was like, I am interested in blah, blah, blah. And it was like, people don't talk like that. They say I'm, we use contractions or whatever. So hopefully the writer has helped me a little bit in giving me a more relaxed way of speaking to my mother versus whomever. But if they haven't, I was talking to somebody about a character that was supposed to be a thug, and it was written, it was not written in any way it was written in a more formal style, which was very frustrating. It's like, you've asked me to do a thug, you said this person is a thug or streetwise or whatever, urban, whatever word euphemism we want to use. But it wasn't written that way at all. So I coached them to like, okay, we're being subtle here, but drop your ending D's and T's and mumble a little bit, which when I need to mumble, I'll actually sometimes literally put my finger in my mouth and like, and just so I can get a feeling of what that might be. But, and it's like practice it a couple of times like that and then remove the finger and try to get enough of that feel so that you feel the mumble, but you can still understand what I'm saying because our job is to communicate. So we can't go but so far with that. So anyway, so things like that. First of all, I hope the writer is giving me some clues. But again, if I know that this is, and not that all thugs speak the same way, but and just exploring what that is, these were the things we played with and we slowed the pace down a lot. And that, for that particular person, brought out a version of a thug that they could do that gave a sense of that. Now, why those elements made us feel that way, I again, long conversation. Different story, the character, her family is West Indian, but she lived in the States. I'm from Chicago, but so meaning that I'm not pulling on my authentic past. But when she was talking to her family, I let the accent fly. But when she was like talking, or when she got mad, I let, it's a stereotype, but that's an opportunity to let it fly.
Mm-hmm.
She was at work, not so much. Not that it wasn't there, but not so much. So those are the kinds of, again, a lot of that I'm pulling from the text, what the authors told me, and giving myself permission to play with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's my best answer for you.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Play. That's an important word for what we do, because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're playing. We're having a good time. We get paid to do it. Yeah, that's great. But we're supposed to be having a good time and, holding people's hands and taking them on this little journey in a story.
Yeah.
So
I think that
play
is
important.
I just said I was going to shut up and then I didn't, so I shouldn't have said anything. But
You're on here to tell.
But I was going to say, like, taking people's hands, I think that is really important, because if it was just us in an acting class, I could be like, I think this elderly shopkeeper actually has a ton of energy and like sounds really young and fun, and like, if you don't like it, don't cast me. Do you know what I mean? But in a bigger story, you have to like with your thug example, Gina, like that's what they wrote and that's what you have to kind of give them to make the story hold together. You can't make a way out there choice about like, yeah, he's like, this is what he does, but actually he like went to Harvard and dropped out, and now like you can't make it up. You have to like paint with the colors that you're given, or the whole story kind of starts to fall apart. So like we have to play within the boundaries of the story that we're telling, which we didn't choose, but we can, like you said, illustrate in like within those bounds in the most creative way that we can.
That's one of the reasons I like the thing that Aaron was saying about casting the book, because we've seen all these actors do so much that if you were going to cast somebody as like Steve Carell, he's had like all, colors of the rainbow in his career, and you know how he's going to react. So depending on the intention of the character, you can think Steve Carell, it won't come out sounding like Steve Carell, but in your mind, you have an intention and a way that this person is a whole person with all these different flavors in them. And that helps a great deal. Rather than trying to mimic that person's voice, you just have them as a whole idea in your head.
It's a way to connect what you have in your head to something visual, to something that's just easy to remember. And it like you just said, if I was thinking about Steve Carell, that would trigger all these different types of little Steve Carell isms. Okay, so this character is going to say things a little bit like this, and he's going to have some Steve Carell in him somewhere, or in her somewhere. And I don't always play like I do a lot of mixing up with genders. So I'll do a female character, and I would apply some. What if she sounded a bit like Steve Carell? What if she what if she was gruff and just up front? Like, the author did give me a couple of little tidbits in here. How, she said in a standoffish way, or, however they describe people. I'll use those, and I'll give myself permission to make kind of a weird choice like that. Well, it's part of the fun of doing this stuff. If I can't figure out a way to make this fun for me, and it's just pure work, I'm not going to want to keep doing it. This is hard work. I don't want to just suffer. I want to have a good time doing what I'm doing. And doing that, and casting, right? And having all these the tools in our toolbox makes that happen, and we get to play. Have a good time. Get to hit the playground. Get to run around, hit the slide.
Yeah.
Jungle gym. It's all in my head.
There was an audience question wondering if anyone has ever had to re-record a book, either because they were sick. This was from the question, or because you know more about your voice now. And I would add, because of experience, you would maybe make different character choices or vocal choices for a character. Has that ever happened to you, or have you ever wished you could go back and re-record something? I will say I have wished I could go back and re-record things for sure from the beginning of my career.
Yeah, especially early stuff.
Yeah.
I would never go back and re-record something. I don't want to get myself into that headspace. That gets me thinking too much. But I have had to re-record one book, and I don't remember why. It was something. I think it was a book in a series, and I made a choice, and it was the wrong choice. And I can't remember exactly what it was. It was about the voice, the vocal characteristic, and somebody had already done something, but it was like 3 or 4 books prior, and it wasn't in my notes.
Oh no!
I didn't have that, and I had to re-record. It was only like 4 or 5 hours, but still, that's a couple days.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it's not nothing.
Yeah.
I've only
Yeah.
had to re-record stuff for tech reasons, like my computer ate it or whatever, and then I'm doing
Yeah.
it like a week after I did it before, so I'm making all the same choices, just maybe
Right.
slightly deader, because I'm like,
Because you've lost a little bit of your soul.
right, lost a little bit of my will to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
I'm curious about the books I did for the American Foundation for the Blind back in the late 80s,
Mm-hmm.
but I would never go back and listen to them. I
No,
mean, it's just opening a can of worms. And
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, I could be pleasantly surprised, but no, just forward. Let's just move forward.
I did have to re-record part of a chapter last week because the woman is French Canadian, and my son listens to a French Canadian YouTuber all the time. So I'm very, very familiar with this accent. And it came back that the top of the book, I was hitting it a little too hard, and they wanted it more light, which it evolved to more light over the course of the book. But just the first few pages, when I was like, I know this accent, I'm going to do this accent. And it wasn't that she was unintelligible. It was just that it was too much for the rest of the book.
It's kind of a thick accent, isn't it, too?
Oh,
with
yeah.
like D for T. Yeah.
Yeah. It is super, super thick. So I just did a couple of vowel switches and hit the R's a little harder than you would in normal French. But yeah, no, it turned out fine.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the point I was making. Our first job is communication.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter, talking to somebody, they were talking, they know a Gullah accent, which is like South Carolina coastal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, whatever the author said, they have the Gullah accent. And she's like, cool, I know this. And they were like, we don't know what you said.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there is that too.
No, there's a difference between accuracy and listenability when you're talking about narration, and how that's actually something I really have been wanting to talk about, to get into a bit deeper, navigating that, because that is really complicated and is a lot different than if you were going to be in a movie with a character that has a really strong accent. This is a lot of hours of listening to a person's voice. So what are some ways that you all navigate that? How do you determine for yourselves what's a hint of an accent, how far to go with an accent so that it's still listenable?
Yeah, that's a really good one.
I mean, and you're never going to please everyone, because some people will be like, I couldn't even hear it. And other people will be like, oh, like it drowned me in the accent.
Yeah.
Right.
I always go for listenability. Because at the end of the day, they're not looking at a book for the most part. They're not looking at a book. They're only hearing you, and they're probably doing something while they're listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more important to communicate the phrase, communicate the words, the copy, the dialogue, whatever. It's always more important to communicate it so the listener understands it.
Yeah. I try to find a level of it, particularly if it's like first person, that I can do without thinking about it every second.
Yeah.
So that, and like, that might not be the perfect amount of accent, but if I don't do that, then the book will only be like the accent book that I did, and I won't remember the plot.
Right.
So like, you have to find something that flows for you, and remember that like in that country, like if this is like the difference between an accent and a dialect, right? Like if it's stop me if I'm getting this wrong, but if it's a dialect, like that's how you grew up speaking. Like someone from Australia speaks, that's their real voice, as opposed to a French person who moved to America and is now speaking English, but with an accent. And so a dialect has to be like a little more specific, because it's like an accent is just someone speaking a language like poorly in a way, like they're, but a dialect is like more real, but also if you go to any place, people will sound a million different ways. Like there isn't really, you can find someone who sounds like that, whatever you did.
And dialect is also about the words that you choose, right? What are the colloquialisms? What are the sort of, like you said, Janina, like what's some of the code switching that you would do with the people in your community? That all plays into dialect, which then, of course, comes back to the text itself. We're not always given that. So that might determine some of the choices you're making about the accent, because as was discussed earlier in this conversation, if you're told this character has an accent, but you're not given any of the language, even when speaking in English, that that person might use. For example, if your character is not a native English speaker and they're speaking in English, it's unlikely that they're going to use certain like Americanized words. They would use from wherever, like if they learned British English, they're probably going to use a different word, but it doesn't show up that way in the text. Then you kind of have to figure out how to navigate that as the narrator too, and how they might say this word that might be really unfamiliar to them. So there's so much, I just find that there's so much nuance there's always nuance to accent work, especially because, as you said, Emma, no two people are going to sound alike, even if they grew up next door to each other or even in the same home. My sister has a Southern accent. I grew up in Alabama. I have no accent. Like, we sound completely different. So there's always that, but then also like, there's just a lot to navigate with it for sure.
And there's also a lot of traps. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jean.
I was going to say, I mean, ultimately, I try to land on the side of pulling the listener in. Meaning, if you've got them on your side, you can do anything, right? I heard Scott Brick tell a story. I gather he tells lots of stories, but he told a story about some book he did, had an accent. It says the character has accent. And he and the director decided either not to do it or do it very lightly. And he got feedback, is like, comments back, is like, this is the greatest book ever. You did such a great accent. And he barely did anything because they had buy-in. They were with him. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody listens to, my master's is in props design for theater. And so we would build shows and, we got all these things and we would do the research on what a teacup, for example, might look like. Mm-hmm. And there's always some jerk that comes up to the stage during the mission and goes, well, actually, right. Well, and our feedback, our comment would always be, we actually are aware of that. And this is why we did it like so. Mm-hmm. We're not doing museum work. This is what we're not doing museum work. This is theater for your ear. It has we're trying to pull you in. And if you can say, this is the perfect Spanish accent, but I don't care about the story anymore. Not finish listening to the book going, that was the best Spanish accent ever. It should be, I love the story. I love the character. Oh, that accent wasn't perfect, but I want to listen to it again. That's what I want a listener to get.
Yeah. I love that line about we're not doing museum work. That is spot on. It's really good.
We're playing. Yeah. We're playing.
On that note, I think it might be a great moment to switch to our game. So for the folks listening in, this is a little surprise for you. We've broken down all the different ways that we prepare a text, prepare our bodies and our voices for this work. And we've asked our panelists today, or our roundtable folks today, to on the fly here, take a look at a brand new script. They've been given character descriptions, a little setup of the book, and then a couple of lines to read. And they're going to walk us through their process. So we're going to put into practice some of the techniques that you've been hearing about today. And this is the first time they're all looking at it. So this is like, imagine that you're watching someone who's just received a script that they're about to record. This is not their finished product. This is a look into what it looks like when you start to prepare your script and start to think about what those voices might sound like. So I'm going to give our guests a second to kind of find themselves on this document here. Do you see, is it clear which parts to read?
Yeah. Mine says Aaron and Kit.
Is there any brave soul that would like to start?
Sure, I'll start if you guys don't mind. You don't mind? Okay, we got a document. We have some information. There's 2 characters in this scene. This is what they gave me for the setup and the characters. Kemoth and Vordul are ancient dragons who can change shape at will. They have spent centuries in various genders and species, but energetically they remain the same in each iteration. So that gives me a decent little bit of information about them. And then it goes on to say, through time, these 2 have been playing a long enemies to lovers game. Casting is looking to hear a clear distinction between all 3 voices. And there's a couple things that I have to think about here. That's the setup and the characters that I'm about to dive into. And there's also some character descriptions here that I'm going to read. But also the genre is romantasy, so it's romance fantasy. So from the get-go, from the genre itself, I know I can't go too character-y because this is still a romance. And in romance fantasy, it doesn't go as crazy as just regular, what do you call it? low-key fantasy, cozy fantasy. It's a little bit different. You have to keep your characters less charactery and more kind of, you got to add a little bit more sexy because it's romance. You have to. The first character, his name is Kemoth. He's a mischievous copper dragon, seems to always have a twinkle in the eye and believe that the right joke can get you out of most any situation. A chaotically good personality, so he's a free spirit. Currently inhabiting the form of an old gnome. So old gnomes in my world, from all my fantasy reading, they've always been kind of shorter, intelligent. What kind of a voice am I going to pull for this character? I still want to keep him inside the realm of fantasy and inside the realm of romance. So I'm not going to make him all up in here, that would be my first thought if it was a regular fantasy, because that's how gnomes are. All the video games that I've played, he's always going to be up in this area, but I want to romance this a little bit. So I'm going to take him back. I'm going to keep the fun-loving self. I'm going to make him a little deeper voiced, but he's still going to have some charm and some a little bit of character in there because he is still a gnome. But he's also a copper dragon inhabiting this form, so he's playing a little bit. So this is probably where I'm going to keep his voice, but I'm also going to give him a little bit of growl, just because he's fun and he likes to play around. The next character, her name is Vordul. She's a female. She's a conniving green dragon, seems to always have a scheme running, and believes that the best solutions are delivered from the shadows. Precise and patient, very important words. That's going to describe her pace. Patient pace. Precise, her diction is going to be on point. In their execution, currently inhabiting the form of a gorgeous elven woman. Elves always tend to be played as British, so I'm going to kind of lean into that. I'm going to either British or transatlantic or just very highbrow American. That's what I'm going to give for her. And now we have the scene here, which I'm going to read, and I'll read in both characters. My romance narration is what I'm going to lean in with. My romance narration is it's going to be lower toned. That's going to give my dialogue a chance to pop out a little bit. If I hold my narration back and I give it more of a slower pace, I'll make some of the words pop a little bit to keep you interested and also to change things up on you to keep you surprised. So let's go for it. Kemoth carefully set down his teacup, shifting gears. Lovely. Then it seems things are in order on that. Now, V, I presume you're going to cause some kind of dilly-dally drama about attending this council. I suppose you've got some sort of grumpy grudge, elaborate scheme planned, or a coward's game of retreat coordinated. Vordul hissed at the assertion. So says the greatest coward of them all. Kemoth's eyes flashed copper. I suppose who better to be able to see a fellow coward? Kemoth winked at his kin. So, spit it out, you viper. What will it be this time?
Amazing.
So that's my process in creating. Is very abrupt, very quick, but based off the information that I received from the setup and the characters, and then what they wrote about each character, in this short amount of time, that's what I was able to come up with.
That was awesome. Thank you for illustrating for us so clearly what you were seeing and how it was sitting with you and informing your choices. That was really cool to watch. Kit, would you like to go next?
Sure. Do you want to do like a two versions at once, or do you want to go back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be great just to kind of see like a different take on the same thing. If that feels good to you.
Kids' take on that.
Absolutely. So that was awesome, Aaron. This was lovely. So you've heard the setup, Kemoth and Vordul. I was thinking Kemoth, old gnome, and again, like if it's romantic, I too, when I first saw old gnome, I was like, oh, he's gonna talk like this. It's gotta be great. But I was like, no, it is definitely a romance, and he's a copper dragon. So I'm thinking more along the lines of Gandalf, that kind of. I know more than you do, and I've got a little twinkle in my eye. And then for Duel, I'm thinking of Cate Blanchett, that sort of, it says, precise and patient in their execution. She's in the shadows, gorgeous elven woman. I mean, come on, Cate Blanchett, right? So from just a and all these are correct, just a different perspective. Kemoth carefully set down his teacup, shifting gears. Lovely. Then it seems things are in order on that. Now, V, I presume you're going to cause some kind of dilly-dally drama about attending this council. I suppose you've got some sort of grumpy grudge elaborate scheme planned, or a coward's game of retreat coordinated? Vordul hissed at the assertion. So says the greatest coward of them all. Kemoth's eyes flashed copper. I suppose. Who better to be able to see a fellow coward? Kemoth winked at his kin. So, spit it out, you viper. What will it be this time?
I love that button at the end. Nice.
Thank you.
Feels like the ending of a chapter. Amazing. Thank you. It's so cool to hear and really highlight how different the same text can sound with a different take. So awesome. Thank you.
Human narrators.
Yes, exactly. Emma and Janina, would one of you like to go? Which one of you would like to go first?
Okay. No, I'll do it if you want. But if you want, it is all yours.
I feel like all I've got in me is like one take vocally.
Sure.
Okay. Let's start so that you can explain what the situation is, because I'll lose what's left of my voice if I have to do.
Okay. My voice isn't amazing either, but we're both, we can tag team this. Okay. So our genre is romantic comedy. The voices are Derek and Kennedy, and it's first person POV. So already I'm thinking contemporary rom-com first person, I know what this is. So setup and characters. Kennedy and Derek are at the center of this slow burn romantic comedy. These enemies to lovers are seemingly never on the same page throughout the course of the book, with one infatuated while the other is disgusted/annoyed. But who is infatuated and who is annoyed changes constantly depending on where you are in the story. Feel free to go either direction in this excerpt. Casting is looking to hear your take on that dynamic. Derek, 38-year-old male, nice golden retriever who has a bit of a bite when put in a corner or sees something he wants. Doesn't sound that nice. It sounds like a nice guy. Derek would never do that. Okay. Warm, whiskey voice. That's like a descriptive that you hear a lot for both men and women. I'm not sure what that means, but I love whiskey, so I just assume it's what I sound like. Would be open to hearing a growly line, either annoyed or infatuated, as he is often referred to as growling lines. So that's another really common thing. You can't growl all the lines, and if you really did, that would just be exhausting to listen. You got to be sparing with it, seasoning. Kennedy, 35-year-old female, wry wit wrapped around romantic heart, smooth, bright, clear, lives in NYC, but is a transplant, so open to dialect choices. All right. So enemies to lovers is always sort of tricky because you want them to have believable fire, but you also don't want them to be so shitty to each other that everyone will be like, they should just break up. I'm not invested in this. The lines, I'll just read the lines with nothing so you can see what they are. So I wasn't sure what to expect when Derek Pierce sat down across from me, but curious bedroom eyes was not even on the list of possibilities. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what, Kennedy? Like you're after something you think I'm hiding under my clothes. Are you hiding something under your clothes? He smirked knowingly. So I think he's the one into her in this, because if he's not, saying that is weirdly aggressive. If he's not hitting on her that, he should get fired if they work together. Maybe still. And I think it makes more sense for her to be like, what are you doing? But I'm going to try to keep it in the what are you doing, Derek realm, as opposed to why are you looking at me like that? Which might feel exciting, but is not going to work for a rom-com. In terms of voices, he's described as a golden retriever, which I always think of as that's like my Teddy Hamilton voice. But he's growly. So I'm going to go kind of put a little bit of a laugh into his voice, but make it lower. And for her, she's smooth, bright, clear, which is like most heroines. I don't feel particularly smooth, bright, clear today. So like most times I get in the booth, I'm like, oh no, like, am I smooth, bright, and clear enough? But I'm going to give it a go. All right. I wasn't sure what to expect when Derek Pierce sat across from me, but curious bedroom eyes was not even on the list of possibilities. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what, Kennedy? Like you're after something you think I'm hiding under my clothes? Are you hiding something under your clothes? He smirked, knowingly. Oh, and you know what I just did that I don't like? I made it, he smirked, like he's smirking the line. So I'd go back and fix it to make that a separate sentence. So I would do, are you hiding something under your clothes? He smirked, knowingly.
Nice change.
Ta-da!
I could just sit and listen to this and watch this whole process all day long. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you all for going along with this idea.
This is fun.
Amazing. Janina, how are you feeling?
So, interesting in the description. So these are real humans versus dragons and things like that. So yeah, so in theory you can't go quite so zany with a voice. And frankly, for me personally, what rings a bell or what gives me more to work with, is that it is this enemies to lovers thing. So we got that happening. I feel like the description of them almost doesn't tell me anything. Hold on. Anyway, this is what I hear. I'm just going to leave it at that. I wasn't sure what to expect when Derek Pierce sat down across from me, but curious bedroom eyes was not even on the list of possibilities. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what, Kennedy? Like you're after something you think I'm hiding under my clothes? Are you hiding something under your clothes? He smirked, knowingly.
That was good. I love that.
Awesome. That's
great.
Very steamy.
Fantastic.
And my thinking was, I don't know. Whatever. That's what I did.
Love it. Yeah, this is so fascinating to me. I just think this would be such a cool exercise to do with a giant group of narrators and just see how each person interprets it so differently. And they're all amazing. It's like I would listen to every single one of these books. The same one twice, the two different people. So cool. And thank you to Samantha for putting these little excerpts together for us. She put on her producer hat to give a sense of the kind of prompts we get. This is more like what you would get for an audition. More so than an actual full book, obviously, because we're just getting a little blip here. But it's great information to work with to demonstrate for all the folks listening in today kind of what this looks like for us narrators in real time. And thank you all so much for being game to do this little demo. I think it's really, I'm watching all the comments come in and I can tell this is a side of the work that we do that people don't really get to see in this way. And especially in this time where we're all grappling with AI and all of that, it feels really exciting to be able to showcase exactly how much work and detail and nuance goes into being an audiobook narrator. Computers aren't doing this kind 100%. Of thinking and analyzing. So thank you all for that. And thank you so much for bringing just so much expertise to this conversation. This is a dream come true for me to just sit and talk with a bunch of narrators about process. Like it's what I want to do all day long. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to bring Samantha back on.
Thank you so much for joining us for the 6th Rosemoor Roundtable. You can follow all of today's guests on social media or find them on their websites, which we've linked in the details. To keep up with what's next on the Rosemoor Roundtable, you can subscribe to this podcast on the app you're listening to now, or follow Samantha Brentmore at Ms_Brentmore or Rose Dioro at Rose Dioro VO on your social media platform of choice. where we will both be very excitedly promoting the next discussion. Thank you to Brickshop Audio, our producer and distributor for the podcast. And thank you for listening. See you next time.